Marley was dead, to begin with. Scrooge and he were business partners for I don't know how long. Scrooge was his sole mourner. Yet even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event. But as an excellent man of business, on the very day of the funeral, he solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The cellar door suddenly flew open. Bah, humbug, said Scrooge. Just as he headed to shut the door, Marley's ghost leaped out of his coffin to deliver Scrooge an important message. Hey guys, my name is Joy. I'm a year 4 journalism and finance student at the University of Hong Kong. In case you guys haven't heard, I am still digesting news that I recently won the District 89 Table Topics contest.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Dipti Shah and welcome to my show, Artistry. Today I have with me Joy Pamnani, who is a leading communications expert in Hong Kong. Hello, Joy, and welcome to my show.
Hi, Deepti. It's my honor. Thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Joy. So, Joy, you being an Indian have grown up in Hong Kong. That's very novel for many of us. How is it?
I think it's interesting. I was actually born in Hong Kong. My parents met here, and then a few years later, I was born. I think this idea of a mixture in cultural identity is what makes us unique. Like personally, I love certain types of Chinese food. I'm crazy about dim sum, but there are certain aspects of me that are Indian and I can't live without. Like I'm a Bollywood person, you know. I just love to sit down, watch Bollywood movies, and yeah, it's like this blend of cultural identities. My family members also come from different parts of the world. So I have cousins in Morocco, in India, in the United States, Chile. So we're all constantly sharing and bringing, a lot of global culture to our big family.
It's amazing, isn't it? Growing up in a global culture from the very beginning. I mean, it opens
Yeah, definitely.
mind so much.
Yeah.
So, Joy, you are a public speaking enthusiast, champion. What do I say? How did this journey begin?
It began with a lot of speaking competitions during my school days. We would take part in this contest called the Hong Kong School Speech Festival, and it's still going on till today. A lot of people I know start their public speaking journey there. And I'd take part in categories like solo verse, solo prose, and I may not always have won the competition, but I enjoyed it. And then when I came into secondary school, they had even more categories. They had dramatic duologue, they had public speaking solo, public speaking team. In fact, one year I recall signing up for public speaking solo, but by mistake, like the applications got mixed up, and then I had to do public speaking team. So, three friends of mine, and we had to talk about the topic of childhood obesity in the United States. And it was interesting, determining okay, if three people are going to talk about a topic, how are we going to divide the workload? And everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses in communication. Maybe someone's great at content, the other person's more focused on delivery. So who should go first? Why should this person get that position? And that's when I started to get into speaking competitions more, debating as well. And when I came into university, I was working part-time for the Hong Kong Federation of Youth Groups. So they organize Hong Kong's biggest public speaking competition every year. And they co-organize it with Standard Chartered, and thousands of students take part. So we would go to secondary schools and deliver workshops about public speaking. And just a few months before the competition, we would do coaching sessions, either individual, one-on-one, or in groups. Yeah, and now like it became a freelance thing, and now it's my full-time job.
Who knew, right? A childhood hobby.
Yeah.
Today you are having a full-time profession out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Very inspiring. So, when the first time you took the stage, how old were you, or how young rather?
Probably like 7, 8 years old. Yeah.
So, was it your teacher pushing you, or your mother telling you go speak, or how did you go?
It was a speech festival. Definitely. I think initially we took on solo verse, which was like a poem that you had to read on stage. And my teacher said, okay, even if you don't win, this will be a really valuable learning experience for you. And I recall back in those school days, my mom would also join me for the speech festival. So it's like the teacher would take the kids from school, but my mom would show up at the venue and cheer me on. So that I would say that's my first public speaking experience. But then I took on a lot of stuff in my free time, because not just wait around for school to give you opportunities, but actively seek out competitions or opportunities to really present yourself.
Totally, your journey is
Yeah,
your own, and you got
yeah,
to.
that's what you own it.
Yeah, you have to own it. So, what did you graduate in?
And so I took a Bachelor of Journalism at HKU. We're required to do a double major. So my second major was in finance.
Okay. So, did journalism marry well with public speaking?
I wouldn't necessarily just call it journalism, because I think all the courses, all the experience that we got throughout the 4-year program was more of communication in general. And I see so many overlaps between the different forms of communication. If we talk about journalism specifically, there were some courses about writing. We had some courses about video production, photography. There was also a course about news anchoring, but I never got to take it because it always clashed with other classes in my schedule. But the idea of really understanding your audience and asking yourself whether it's, if it's an article in the newspaper, it's always, why do my readers care? If it's a speech, it's, why does my audience want to listen to me? Why should they be interested in this topic or presentation? If it's a podcast, now podcasting is another journalism course I know my juniors are taking. Why do they want to listen? And with video, it's, why do they want to watch me? They have Netflix, right? So it's always the idea of asking yourself, why does my audience care? Why am I the best person for them to listen to? And if you can answer that question, you can be a great communicator.
Got it. I mean, all questions, everything starts from ask why first.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, right. Joy, I understand that Toastmasters International, this
Mhm.
organization has been quite important in your, communications journey. Would you please share in details for all of us who are listening how to go about it and what is Toastmasters actually?
So, Toastmasters is an international nonprofit organization that helps people with communication as well as leadership skills. So, I joined Toastmasters back in 2017, but they're actually a pretty old organization. I believe the first club in Hong Kong started in the 1950s. I believe it was Hong Kong Toastmasters and Victoria Toastmasters, and more came up. And there are clubs all around the world, not just English. Like in Hong Kong, I know we have Cantonese, we have Mandarin. Some clubs even combine multiple languages, because everybody's goal really is to get better at communication and leadership. So I would visit these Toastmasters clubs as like a hobby in high school. I would just go to a meeting, show up, and then I realized that I'm not 18 years old. I'm not old enough to join. So when I came into university, I joined Toastmasters, and I was so excited. It was an interesting learning journey, because at first you're getting used to the Toastmasters environment, the roles that we have at meetings, and then you're watching other speakers, you're learning from them. It's like you're not just learning to become a better speaker yourself. Toastmasters really emphasizes evaluation and feedback, and you're getting feedback from all angles. And I can really say that my communication goals really changed over time, and that's what has led to me becoming a better speaker. Like initially, I would be quite nervous presenting in front of an older audience. like I'd grown up working with students, coaching sessions and delivering workshops at schools. But at Toastmasters, there was a bit of an age gap with the audience. And I was really nervous. I recall, I think 1 or 2 months into joining Toastmasters, one of my friends had sent me for a competition as a demo speaker. And like when you do a favor for someone, you expect this someone to show up for the competition. But like one night before, he's like, I won't be there. Are you serious? You're just gonna send me to a corporate club like this for a competition all by myself? And then everybody's like double my age or even more. But I went, and even though I was terrified, it was a wonderful learning experience. I talked about a message that really mattered to me, which is why I believe text messages would never take over phone calls. And in fact, few people that night texted me back and they said, yeah, you're right. I called my best friend tonight because of your speech. So that was one of the early goals in public speaking, was speaking to an older audience. And then it went on to storytelling, to coaching. And now I'm quite interested in humor as well. So yeah.
Right. Sounds like a fun place to be and a nice place to grow up, and learn and develop your skills.
Yeah, definitely.
Correct. So, is writing related to, giving your speech? Or would you say writing skills are necessary to become a better speaker?
I would say there are overlaps in terms of content and organization. So a great writer, at least in journalism, we were always taught to put the audience, the readers first, and ask yourself why this piece of writing really matters to an audience. And the thing with journalism back in the day was that everything should be summarized in that headline. And when it gets printed on a newspaper, especially on the first page, the first few paragraphs summarize everything in the story, and then we move on to the details later. So being consistent, being clear, and not over elaborating and wasting the reader's time was really important in writing. And I would say the same for public speaking. And I would also say, like in writing, like we have an opportunity to go through the newspaper article a few times, but then in public speaking, if somebody's attention is drifting away, or maybe they're checking their mobile phone, they didn't see your message, or they have no idea what you said. So the fact that you should reinforce your call to action a few times during your speech and make sure there is a take-home message for your audience, I feel is one of the differences maybe between writing and public speaking.
Got it. So attention span is what we are all fighting for, right?
And definitely, yeah.
By the second, with so much of information being flooded at our eyes.
Yeah, in fact, it is 7 seconds human attention span, which is even shorter than a goldfish.
Wow.
Sad. Yeah, sad reality.
So Joy, today, if I were to communicate in my everyday life, say professionally and personally, what would you say are the key elements that I should know of such that the other person understands what I'm talking about?
I would say ask yourself why you're communicating and what is the goal of the message you're trying to send. Like in public speaking, we either say you're here to inform, you're here to persuade, you're here to inspire, or maybe you're there to entertain. So what is your goal in the speech? And sometimes you might notice that these goals overlap. That's totally fine, but you want to ask yourself where you're going. And I'll give you an example. So a few months back, I read a book. I loved this book, Why We Sleep, by Matthew Walker. And I just loved it so much, I had to share it in a speech. So he talks about the benefits of sleep and how they manifest in terms of better productivity, creativity, health, relationships, all that stuff. And I could have easily just summarized his book into a 7-minute speech with all the facts. But my goal here is not exactly to inform, because I felt like my audience knew the benefits of sleep and they've known it for a long, long time, Hong Kong people, but they just don't value sleep. So instead of just cramming facts into this long speech, I want to inspire them to value the importance of sleep and the impact that it has on productivity, on creativity, on becoming a better person in general. So you can see that this speech did include a bit of education information, but the fact that I was aware, okay, the goal of the speech is to inspire the audience. And I made use of really creative examples and interesting people in history that have slept or gotten revolutionary ideas as a result of their dreams. And people were impressed. They say, yeah, we're going to sleep a lot more after this speech. So being clear about the real purpose of your speech, understanding your audience. And then after you build on content, we go towards delivery. So how can you deliver this speech with impact? Can you add in hand gestures? Can you add in facial expressions, eye contact? Last year, I took part in a competition and I was actually representing our city. But initially, this competition happens in person. We go to a city in the District 89 regions. Basically, you can say a Chinese city, travel out of Hong Kong, and we have the district conference there. That's where we compete. But it happened on my laptop with this webcam right here. And making eye contact with the audience was one of the biggest struggles I faced initially. So what I would do is I kept a teddy bear behind the webcam just to remind myself that is where I'm supposed to look throughout the speech, not at the audience, not anywhere else. So how your delivery makes an impact to the audience. And one of the I shouldn't say one of several world champions that made it to the world champion stage this year did some interesting stuff where they were moving back and forth or like covering the camera, and they were able to make creative use of their virtual stage. So that idea of delivery and how you can make use of not just your voice, your gestures, and now even your virtual stage that you have around you to make the message more impactful, more memorable. Yeah.
Got it. So you've actually touched upon a very important topic of how to actually make an impact while you are in an online environment, having an online audience where you cannot necessarily engage your body or go close, to the audience to get them interested.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Joy, would you say that once I have spoken, the style of speaking also matters?
The style, yeah, I guess. I mean, everybody has their own style of speaking. It would just have to be more relevant to your audience and the context with which you're delivering this speech. Like I can give you an example. A few years back, I delivered a speech as a eulogy to my grandma. She had just passed away, and emotionally, like even though the others in my family had accepted it, my grandma was actually the closest person to me to ever pass away. And I delivered a speech as like a tribute to her. And I talked about what I learned from my grandma. And normally you think if it's a eulogy, it's gotta sound depressing. You're in that context where everybody's grieving. But I talked about how my grandma was a great inspiration to me. Personally, I'm a Sindhi person, and like we hear a lot about how India's partition with Pakistan affected the Sindhi population, and nowadays, oh no, is the language gonna die someday? But I talked about how my grandma inspired me to keep Sindhi culture and the Sindhi language alive in the future, and many other things that she taught me. And even though you may think the style of the speech has to be grievances, you need to show that you're depressed, I focused on the aspect where my grandma really inspired me, and it's a message. These are things that I learned from her that I would want to carry on to future generations.
I mean, this is so amazing, even the context is, sad, you can still make it very inspiring and something that people will remember forever.
In
Wow.
fact, I said it would be a dream of mine to start a Sindhi Toastmasters club someday. I know it sounds like a crazy idea. Nobody's agreed with me yet, but we'll see.
Oh, it's a great idea. You should just start, I
Yeah,
recently heard or read somewhere that the secret to success is to start before you're ready. Yeah, and most of us are always in the waiting, aren't we? We wait for the
of course.
perfect time, we wait for the perfect people. Yeah, okay, I'll do
Situation.
this and be ready, but we're never ready. Life doesn't give that time.
Exactly. Yeah, agreed.
Joy, in everyday life, commonly, uh, the way I speak to my husband, say, or I speak to my friend, I go on talking. I go on talking. I am sharing my, innermost, story, whatever it is. And they will be like looking blankly at me as if they're not listening. What is this listening? And why do we keep on saying, everyone says, I think, you're not listening to me. You don't listen to me. What does this mean?
I wouldn't say it's not you're not listening. Well, first let's understand what listening really means.
Yes.
And to many of us, we think listening is simply auditory. It's the idea that somebody else is saying something, and you're just listening to it. You're getting the auditory, you're getting the sounds, registering it in your brain. But it's so much more than that. I was reading a book by I believe his name is Kerry Johnson. He talks about neuro-linguistic programming, and he says verbal and non-verbal cues make a huge difference in the way we interpret what the other person is saying. A great example of this is what people use in sales. So, for example, if you're selling insurance to somebody, how can you tell if the other person is really interested in your insurance, or they're like kind of drifting off? No, I'm not really into this thing. Well, if you notice them mirroring you non-verbally, so let's say you're the client and you're the salesperson and you have your arms crossed. If the client is keeping their arms crossed, there's a good chance that they're mirroring you and they're in touch with what you're saying. And in fact, this is not just used in the form of an observation, but sometimes when the salesperson wants to get the other person, wants to get their client more engaged, they will actually mirror the other person. And although it may seem like an insult, if initially, oh no, the client is just crossing their hands, I immediately cross my hands. Or if the client is putting their hand on their head, you immediately do it. It sounds like you're mocking that person. But subtle changes, like if the client is crossing their arms and you slightly cross your legs, he calls this technique cross mirroring. It makes a huge difference. So, in terms of what listening really is, to answer the first part of your question, it's not simply about picking up what the person said, but it's about how they said it and the cues that you receive in line with the message that they delivered. So the second part of the question is how, like, why people say they're not listening, or
Yeah, the second part is like, people keep complaining, look, I'm talking to you, but you're not listening. Maybe, I don't know, it has to do with the body language, or what is it?
I would say it's the ability to connect and ask yourself why it's relevant to the other person. Like, why nowadays, when I deliver a speech at Toastmasters, if it's a meeting happening online, we did like a 24-hour marathon last year for public speaking. You're not just competing against another speaker, you're competing with the attention span that this interesting complex instrument called the human brain is. And you have external distractions. You may have mobile phone, you could have other notifications on your browser, or tons of information that's out there on the internet. And you also have internal distractions. Oh yeah, I got to think about what to make for dinner today. Do I have this in my fridge? And what am I going to do? Oh, is the weather rainy? Should I go out for a walk? There are a million things that people have to think about. And it's like your message has got to be engaging, has got to be able to connect with the other person, because if you're not able to establish why the other person should care, then they probably won't.
I have I have experience in this, and I think my husband works best with a yes or no question. Should I do
Yeah,
it? Should I
simplify
get
it,
this
right?
done? That's
Yeah.
much better. And that too on a WhatsApp chat. Should I or shouldn't I? And
Shouldn't
then
I?
I get the
Yeah,
answer.
that's true. But
Right.
I would say, like, despite the fact that we're all getting so used to WhatsApp, it's through video calls, it's through actually speaking to someone over the phone that you're able to pick up cues that you would otherwise never see in a WhatsApp message. And I know, like, an argument or rebuttal here maybe, oh, what about GIFs? They convey they convey facial expressions, but it's not the same as sitting down with someone or actually seeing the kind of verbal, non-verbal cues they're delivering to you as opposed to just a meme or a GIF.
Correct. That is true. And the
Yeah.
joy of annoying the other person.
Oh
That is
yeah.
also missing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, Joy, good vocabulary has always attracted me. There is a difference in the way a person with a good vocabulary talks. Maybe it's
Mhm.
not intentional, but it can be seen, it can be
Mhm.
felt. Do you think that good vocabulary adds to a speech being effective?
To be honest, no. I've had many lecturers in university, and I believe professors, lecturers, they fall into two categories. There's one lecturer that uses all these complex professional terms, technical terms throughout the lecture. And it's like the concepts just become harder to understand. And at the end of the lecture, because you don't understand those concepts, it's like, am I stupid? Or is this topic just really complicated? And then there's another professor who simplifies the message so well and doesn't rely on these super technical terms, but they're able to draw in associations, references, analogies, metaphors that make you understand a message so well. It just clicks in your head. And when you walk out of the lecture room, it's like, I'm the smart one, not him, you know? So that's why I think a complicated, complex, fancy words are not necessarily the key to effective communication, because your goal with communication is to deliver a message to the other person. But if your goal is to just use fancy terms and make things more complicated for the other person, then probably not. But use of good language in descriptions, especially when you're storytelling, we talk about learning more about a character and establishing that region for conflict and resolution, then yes, but your goal should be effective communication, not confusing the reader and showing off your vocabulary.
True, true. It's just me who gets attracted, nothing else.
Completely understandable.
Yes. Uh, Joy, now coming to another important part, which I feel is, helps in communication. How much is reading important?
I would say, for me, I like reading. I actually enjoy it. And I feel like reading has helped me more in impromptu speaking. The competition that I took part in last year was table topics. So they give you a question on the spot, and you only have about 2 minutes to answer that question. And coming up with ideas for my responses, I would say reading helped, be it reading a book, reading articles, listening to podcasts, because you have content readily available, you have examples, and you can relate it to this random question you have no idea you're going to get. In terms of whether reading helps, I guess it depends what your goal is. If it is to find content from your for your speech, yeah, definitely it's information. But if you want to become a more effective communicator, I would say selective articles, selective books, materials where the other person is actually teaching you how to communicate well would be good. Like an example I can give is last year I borrowed this book. I think it was called Tap Dancing in Financial Waters. It was at the library nearby, and basically what they did was compiled Warren Buffett's letters to shareholders over the years. And you seem like Warren Buffett, he's a finance guy. He doesn't know how to write, right? No, no, he wrote his letters really well, and he's able to apply like metaphors and simple life references to finance analogies. And I'm like, wow, you know I kind of wish in my finance essays I could speak more like him when I do my assignments. So it really depends what your goal is, and you want to look out for effective communicators so you can learn from them.
You're right. Actually, I must get that book.
Yeah.
I'm a reader too. Yeah, not many people are these days, sadly, but I like reading too. What are the workshops that you're offering currently?
So I work with schools and I also work with individuals. So in terms of workshops I'm offering to schools, they are overcoming stage fright, effective delivery, impactful presentations. Sometimes I offer workshops catered to the competition that they're joining. So take some time to understand the criteria of the competition. Like if we're doing a debating competition, is it the fact that the students will get a motion on the spot, or we already have the motion? And I guide them through the research process, how to rebut, come up with rebuttals. And we also do like a lot of mock debate training in that sense. I also do interview skills, mock interviews, resume reviews, CV construction workshops. And I've been delivering like youth leadership programs on behalf of Toastmasters. So basically, an English teacher will approach us and would want to set up a long-term program for his or her students to improve public speaking skills. And with that in mind, we assess how old these students are, what are their biggest challenges with public speaking, and we design like a long-term training program. So I had one last year, and I would notice one of the biggest struggles for these girls was yes, they were a little afraid to speak on stage, but B, many of them were relying on scripts. And in fact, I can even share that like we would meet up in the mornings, and many girls would try and hide the fact that they had a script. And I would notice that the script itself is behind the camera. So it's like speaking like that, delivering a speech. And even though I can tell they did not want us to notice this as evaluators from Toastmasters, I told them, you can try and lie to us, but you can't lie to yourself. And throughout the program, we share techniques for how these students can rely less on a script and train themselves to speak when it comes to impromptu speaking, and also to summarize their points and rely on like a cue card with a summary, as opposed to having to always rely on a script. So I feel like that's one of the pain points that I notice with many students in Hong Kong. But obviously, I would have like a discussion with the teacher to understand better.
And how soon can they join? At what age can children join your workshops?
I mostly focus on primary, secondary, and university school students. I would say there's no perfect age to join public speaking. Like communication is a skill you'll use everywhere. Not just at work. You'll use it when you go on dates. You'll use it when you're talking to friends, to family members. So the earlier you make an investment in communication, the better off you are. That's the biggest takeaway I took away from that financial book of Warren Buffett, which is the best investment you can make is it's not in some stock or some ETF or some bond. It's in yourself. And if you invest in yourself, you're gonna beat the market. You're gonna beat Dow Jones, S&P 500, Hang Seng Index, because you made a wise investment decision.
Absolutely. Investment in self, right? That's why personality development programs are such a big hit now. And
Of course, yeah.
and we have to join them, like we have to be trained. Joy, any final tips on stage fright?
on stage fright. I would say don't be afraid to admit you're scared. Like me, I'm terrified right now, but I'm just great at hiding it. And that's what many successful speakers are as well. They're just great at hiding the fact that they're scared. And you can turn your fear into something else. For me, I like to turn it into excitement. That's why I always pick topics that I'm genuinely passionate about. And even though I'm nervous, I'll use that faster heart rate to project my voice across the room or to put passion into the message that I'm delivering. Another thing is, if you have an audience in front of you, I would suggest picking people that are smiling and nodding in the audience and trying to rotate eye contact between these people. So it looks like you're looking at the entire audience, but you're just rotating eye contact between the people that are giving you good impressions and make you feel more confident.
That's wonderful. That's are actually very useful tips, I would rather say. On the parting note, Joy, can you please refer a book which is your favorite on public speaking?
Well, this is not necessarily on public speaking, but it's relevant to habit formation, which is really important for language learners because I know many people in Hong Kong, English is not their first language, and learning to master English would be one of the important steps of mastering public speaking. So I really love the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. He talks about the importance of habit formation in your journey towards self-improvement. Like if you get 1% better every day, you're 37% better by the end of the year. It's literally like a graph that goes up like that. And one of my favorite messages from his book was about how rewarding habits are the ones that get taken up. And he uses examples like exercise, where if you're picking a route that is really scenic, you're way more likely to go for a run than if you're just running on a treadmill. Or if you pick a form of exercise that is fun for you, then you're more likely to come back and return that aspect of exercise. And I can share that this is applicable to language learning in my own life because I was born in Hong Kong, and English, yes, is my first language, but I speak two other Indian languages and I'm not great at them. I'll admit I'm not great at them. Like sometimes I mix English with Hindi and Sindhi and like random Bollywood dialogues that I've heard in movies. But one of the habits that I formed that's kept me going in my journey towards getting better at Hindi and Sindhi is the fact that the habit of watching Hindi movies with subtitles and actors that are really fun to watch, movies that are funny. I love romantic comedies. Is rewarding to me. That's why I'll keep going back and doing it again and again and again so that I get better at it. And I highly recommend this for second language learners out there who are looking to get better at English. Find an attractive actor or actress and keep going back for movies again and again. And you too will build a habit over time and get better.
That trick always works. Just find a
Yeah,
hot guy and you will be stuck.
of course.
Joy, where can people contact you for workshops?
So I'm all over social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, at Joy Pamnani. Feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to help.
On that note, thank you so much, Joy, for sharing such valuable tips for our viewers. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure that you've come on my channel.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Dipti Shah and thank you for watching my channel. If you like the content that I create here and the amazing people who come on the show, Artistry, then please subscribe to my channel and keep visiting it. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.